welcome back. We are here today with Mike Ragsdale. Mike, it's great to have you on the Gravity Podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so let's start at the beginning. As we talked about, our format is to hear this full life journey of yours, and you're up to some really great stuff and want to kind of hear what's led you to it. So tell me a little bit about kind of your early childhood upbringing, some of your kind of early memories, what your family was like, where you're from, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, well, I grew up in a small town named Coleman, Alabama. It's about an hour north of Birmingham. Pretty small. I think maybe 15,000, 12,000 population probably at the time. I was a young person, a little larger now. My father worked for the power company. He read meters and climbed power poles in the early part of his days, and then kind of ran the warehouse for 42 years. So very very much a middle class, lower middle class upbringing. My mom actually moved from, I was originally born in Boston, but moved from Virginia Beach to join the convent in Coleman, Alabama. And that's where there was a convent and where she came to school to study to be a nun. And met my dad and forever altered that course. And so mom and dad raised my brother and I there in Coleman, Alabama, small town. I mean, very much in a lot of ways like a Mayberry or just another classic small town. And, had a great childhood. I don't, all of us go through traumas and our own trials and tribulations, but for the most part, it was just a really great youth. When I left high school, I went to Auburn. I thought I was going to be an architect. I knew I liked to draw. Not draw, but I was doing a lot of designing on graph paper and stuff back then. And when I got to Auburn and realized I was not anywhere intelligent enough to go into architecture school, I realized that, there's a lot more math involved. It's not just drawing, and so I ended up transferring to the University of Alabama and going into advertising and public relations. And so I graduated with a degree in communication from the University of Alabama, and then couldn't get a job, frankly. And I sent out resume.
Let me just hop in there for a second, because I want to slow you down and go back to some of this early childhood part. And I immediately, a number of things just kind of jumped out at me. I also had that same realization in architecture school. I think it was physics maybe that got me. But
right.
When I realized that I was going to be responsible legally to make sure these buildings stayed up forever, I opted out. The history and design were fun, but the rest was scary. So
exactly.
But let's go back, because I've been really fascinated in doing these interviews that generally, it seems like people have unconditionally loving childhoods or very kind of traumatic childhoods. Either way, it tends to really shape their lives. And I'm fortunate enough to interview people that have really overcome a lot and used those experiences to serve them and create, great lives for themselves, have a lot of success. So you had mentioned, your family being one where you said, you had a great childhood, and then there was also, trauma along the way. So I am kind of curious in your case, if you could maybe expand a little bit on maybe both of those things. I mean, if the trauma along the way was just kind of normal little, hiccups, I get it, but if there's anything there that maybe did really have an impact on you, I'd love to hear more about it.
Well, I would say that I had incredibly supportive, loving parents, honestly. And, they did, everything they possibly could to help my brother and I both become successful entrepreneurs. My brother's also a very successful entrepreneur. And, it was interesting because Dad, graduated high school, but I mean, he flunked third grade. I mean, he was held back. I mean, he struggled through school, and I think was probably never diagnosed with, some sort of dyslexia or something that really inhibited his ability to learn in a classroom environment. It was just not something that was diagnosed back in those days. So dad, never graduated college or anything like that. Mother, on the other hand, was very educated, and she became a journalist. And so she, wrote for the local newspaper, and she was always writing. And really, dad stayed pretty consistently with the power company, and very blue collar and very, he dispatched trucks, and he mowed the grass, and he cleaned the warehouse and the bathrooms, and so he was kind of this all-encompassing manager. So had a high degree of work ethic. I mean, he would leave the house at 6 a.m. to go to work, and we'd see him again around 4 or 5. And that was just dad, and he was always on call. And anytime we sat down to Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving dinner, it was guaranteed, that he was going to get a phone call, and he was going to have to go out and, service people who were without power or whatever. It was just a guaranteed event every year. But mother's career kind of followed my brother and I. So when we were in school, she was the lunchroom lady. When we were in Boy Scouts or Cub Scouts, she was the den mom, so her career kind of ended up following our interests and our paths. So she was always there. And, as you get older, that becomes less cool. It's super cool when you're in 4th and 5th grade, but when you're in high school, not so much, but that's it. She was consistent throughout it in her support. The traumas I had were self-induced originally. I was kind of the goody two-shoes kid. I was the overachiever because mom was always pushing me. I was an Eagle Scout. I was, all of these different things. And mom was really the one kind of pushing me, to kind of achieve these things. But in 7th grade, I started getting in trouble, not like drugs or anything like that, but I started to be mischievous. I mean, and not in a hurtful way, but, sneaking out of the house, toilet papering teachers' yards and getting caught, and, these coming of age type things that I would say were more Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer trouble, not, not the type of trouble that unfortunately a lot of kids get into, but mischievous trouble, but still caused embarrassment for my parents, embarrassment for me. And so that was an inflection point, almost like a waking, because it changed everybody else's perception of me too. Right. Okay. So suddenly when I got in trouble for doing something mischievous, it really conflicted with this perception that people had of me through that point. So that's neither good nor bad, but it definitely set me off on a path of awakening, and that who am I? Am I what I was the first, 10, 12 years of my life, or am I something different as a teenager? So
yeah. And sorry, just what age was that you were starting to have that kind of an awakening? I'm just curious about that.
It's that 6th, 7th, 8th grade, like, it's middle school. It's all of a sudden having an interest in girls, all of a sudden having your feelings hurt, being very self-conscious about your appearance,
right?
Being, like you don't really have that much in 3rd and 4th grade. But by the time you get to 6th grade and the girls are starting to, catch your attention, and you're wondering why they don't like you. And you realize later on in hindsight, you realize you were trying so hard that you were just repelling everything around you, and that really continued throughout high school and college. I mean, I never understood. I was one of those kind of, I would say the biggest defining characteristic about me in a lot of ways in high school and college was that I felt rejected by members of the opposite sex, and carried a deep resentment about that, because I couldn't understand it. Like I didn't understand what's wrong with me, kind of thing. And look, that's so typical, and it's a very typical experience. But for me, it really was defining, because I think in a lot of ways, and I've heard other people say this, so this is nothing particularly original, but in a lot of ways, I've overcompensated later in my life, trying to be the guy that people like, and trying to be that, trying to be one of the cool kids, and, and never quite being there, but always aspiring to be, even at this age, and I still have high school friends that I play Call of Duty with 3 or 4 nights a week, that it's our version of golf. We get online and play our games. So I'm very fortunate that I literally have friends I've known since kindergarten. I have friends that I've been friends with for 40 plus years who I still play games with almost every night. I
Mhm.
travel with to the Philippines, to Thailand, to different places, so I'm
Mm.
very blessed that I have lifelong friends. And I didn't know that wasn't a thing until, I married my wife, et cetera, and realized, oh, not everybody is so fortunate to have
Yeah.
that, and so I
Yeah.
really have a strong foundation with my friends. And I would say that was the biggest thing that came out of high school
Mhm.
was this very tight bond, this very
Mm.
tight friendship I have that ended up turning into business partnerships and much more down the road.
Yeah, good. So I want to hear about that, but just to kind of, flesh this out a little bit more, I think what you're sharing is great. It's really very normal experience that maybe still isn't as talked about as it should be. What it's like to be a teenage boy and the role of relationships and being liked and accepted and validated and how that can really influence your life. I mean, depending on how much you let it, or how much resentment gets built up, or how much work you do or don't do to kind of become aware of what's happening, right? And then decide if you want to change something about it. So I'm curious, you kind of described this, awakening, or, kind of realization of what was going on. And oftentimes, those things are very clear in hindsight, but, maybe you could explain a little bit along the way, how present were you to what was going on, and kind of the inner conflict that was there, and what you wanted to do about it, or did it not really start to become clear what had been happening all those years until you got to a certain point in life? Maybe you could just elaborate a little bit on that. And then I also want to hear, the gaming thing obviously becomes a big part of this, and maybe we can, talk about how you got to that. But um you know were you interested in gaming as a kid, and, kind of what role does that thread have as you start to move through your childhood?
It's really interesting because, I was born at the precise right time to experience video games literally from the ground up. So, I remember getting the Pong system, and it was at Sears and Roebuck. We would go out of town to the mall, or, like in some other city, because we just certainly didn't have one. But I remember the first Pong game, and it was literally just, a dot moving back and forth on a screen. And that was probably when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, right? And then came along the Atari 2600, and so you were able to play Space Invaders and Pac-Man and these games. And then I got into Commodore VIC 20 and Commodore 64, and then
Mhm.
Nintendo and Sega Genesis. So I've been along with every platform along the way, and it really was something that it's been amazing to watch that
Mhm.
entire thing unfold and to blossom into what it is, and where it's virtually indistinguishable from reality in some cases now.
Mhm.
So I believe that's I believe there's a purpose in that. I don't know what it is, but I do believe that um, playing games, some guys are into golf, or
Mhm.
they're into a sport. For me and my friends, it's always been gaming, and that's been
Mhm.
what's brought us together. So it's been a huge defining um, thread that's been common throughout the fabric of my whole life. And I feel like it's something that is important for people to play. And in fact, without skipping topics, I had the pleasure of being on Necker Island with Richard Branson for about a week a couple years ago. And one of the things that he does, he's so big on play. And I always
Mhm.
felt guilty playing video games as an adult, like I should be working and I shouldn't be doing this. But after leaving him, I really realized that play is such an important part of his life. Now he's playing billiards or chess, or,
Mhm.
wakeboarding, whatever he's doing. But for me, it is a huge part of my life every day now, and really, in hindsight, always has been. So I think
Mhm.
that component of play
Mhm.
is super important to my happiness and productivity, and it's been with me since childhood.
Yeah, I definitely want to come back and talk about that kind. I've had this debate with many of my friends as it pertains to parenting. So I have a belief system around play and games in particular. But Let's kind of stick with that first thread. So this, you have this kind of awakening. Tell me just a little bit more about kind of like how that went for you. Was that something you realized in hindsight now, or was that something that you were consciously experiencing along the way?
It was one of those things when you start to get to the age where you're spending the night at friends' houses, and then somebody suggests sneaking out of the house in the middle of the night, and there's a sense of adrenaline I got with that, and that I felt like an adult. I felt like it was a sense of freedom running around in the middle of the night through neighborhoods at 2 a.m. and just slinking around and walking to the school or the high school or sneaking around. It felt adventurous. It got your blood, pumping and circulating. And then when you get away with it, you get bolder and bolder and bolder, So I would say that there was never any malicious intent. There was never any real trouble being created, but certainly scandalous, to a seventh grader and to a seventh grader's parents who are used to having, the altar boy, literally the altar boy, and the Boy Scout, kind of being the model that they're holding out as what you should be. And
Mhm.
instead I'm sneaking out in the middle of the night and getting in trouble and getting brought home by the police or whatever, that type of stuff. So I would say the awakening is probably more coming of age,
Yeah.
and realizing that, there are choices and those choices have consequences. But even though those choices sometimes had bad consequences, I still loved it. I still loved the feeling I got of taking risks. And I think that later played out in my professional life as well.
Yeah, so that's kind of why I was so curious about that, because there is this kind of feeling, and it's like an incongruence, as you said, that you have this energy, this kind of thrill, this excitement, this something that feels like, I want to do this. It's fun, it's exciting, and I want to do more of it. I want to level that up, but it's definitely, on the other hand, like, well, in this case, your parents, society, the community you're in, they say I should be something else. And so there's this conflict, and I don't want to, project, but I feel that a lot in our society today, and I feel that a lot in my own life and have over the years, where it's like, hmm, do I want to kind of chase this thing that people say is bad, right, or risky, or not the path you're supposed to go on. I mean, kind of coming back to the gaming thing, I was telling my son this last night. When I was a kid, and I kind of went through most of those various gaming phases too. Well, but when I was a kid, if you sat in your basement, which is usually where the console was, right, and played video games, then you were a idiot. You were wasting your life. You should be
Yeah,
studying. You should be going to college. You should be doing all these things. That was bad over there. And not totally, completely, but by and large, there was this fear that that was going to go down a bad path. Turns out, fast forward, the gamers are the athletes of our generation now, right? They're
absolutely.
the celebrities, the superstars, the successful ones. So, I'm kind of struck by this, like, this desire to maybe go over one way when there's this pull that you're supposed to be back somewhere else.
Yeah, and I've entered a stage of my life where it really is about the pursuit of happiness for me, and it's a lifelong struggle. I'm a chronic worrier. I'm a very manic personality. I can be I can be the life of the party, or I can be the most depressed individual you've ever met, and it's very up and down. So I've
Mhm.
tried to find a balance, and I really also have come to the realization that our purpose here is to be happy, and if you're not personally happy, you're not going to be, there's something that's a lot more contagious than COVID, and it's happiness,
Mhm.
or it's attitude. So if you feel when a negative person walks into the room, I mean, it brings an entire room down. You also feel when a ball of energy walks into a room and lights up the room. So I feel like, if you're not a happy person, you're not going to be inspiring happiness in others. And you're also not going to be in a position to do good. You're not going to be in a position, you're not going to be in the mood to start charities and to contribute to, charitable projects. That's something you've got to start with yourself and then work in concentric circles outward. But if you don't have that central circle taken care of, the rest of the circles aren't going to happen. They're just not going to happen reliably. So I feel like, that pursuit of happiness is something I've struggled with my entire life. But as the older I get, the more I realize how essentially what you're talking about is, how do you find a place where you're able to, be happy and support your loved ones, and also live the life you want to live without letting society tell you you have to be a certain thing or you have to do it a certain way. I'm kind of convinced we all have to shed that skin as quickly as we possibly can. And unfortunately, it's often not until much later in life that we realize how important that is. And by then, as someone famously said, youth is wasted on the young.
Mhm.
And it's I think that's kind of where I am. I'm going, dang man, I wish I could go back, and like we all do, I wish I could go back in time and have this wisdom. But that said, we don't have that luxury. All we can do now is focus on the present moment.
Yeah, I love Naval Ravikant. I don't know if you follow him at all, but
I know who he is. Yeah.
yeah. So he talks about you kind of have these like stages where you have and I might butcher this, but from memory, you've got your health, you've got your financial freedom, and then there's time. And the key is to try to be able to put those three together.
Yep.
Usually when you're young, you've got no time and no money, but you're healthy. And then you get to a certain age where you're still healthy, um, and you've got some money, but you have no time because you're working really hard. And then if you're not careful, you get to a point where you've got time and money, but your health is gone. And so the key is to
Exactly.
try to bring those three together, which I like a lot. Okay, so let's fast forward to back to college. So you're kind of having this realization architecture isn't for you, and you go into marketing. Tell me a little bit about kind of how things unfold for you from there.
So I went into I hopped around majors for a while, like many people do, and finally settled on communication. I found that I liked being creative, and I felt like being in advertising was a way to be creative while still making a living. Again, not realizing that you're not confined to the options that they have on the syllabus. You can make up whatever life you want, but at the time you don't really know that. And so I enjoyed it, and I did well in the program, but I'm kind of an idea guy. I'm not a graphic designer. So my portfolio, quote unquote, is mostly copy, writing and ideas and headlines. And, graphic design is not my calling by any stretch. And this is pre, you know, internet and pre freelancers and, all that sort of stuff, uh, as far as online freelancers. So I couldn't get a job. I sent resumes everywhere. I got interviews, but then I never was able to score a gig. And finally, I think my professors finally kind of felt sorry for me. I went to Yellowstone and worked for a season at Old Faithful as a cashier, and then I think my professors felt bad for me, so they said, "Why don't you come back and be a graduate teaching assistant? We'll give you financial assistance if you help us teach classes, etc." So I went back and got a master's degree in advertising and PR just because I didn't have any other options, not because I really aspired to be academically forward thinking. I was just killing time. And under those circumstances, for that 2 years, I began to do consulting work, freelance work for one of the professors. And Dr. Ganzenbach was much more of an entrepreneur than he was a professor. He had all these side hustles and corporate accounts, and he was working with Southern Living and Coastal Living and American Airlines and different clients. So he hired me to just do things like tabulate surveys or clean up, copy and run errands. So for the next 2 years, I began kind of learning from him. He was my Mr. Miyagi, and he's teaching me kind of like never turn down gigs and until you get to a certain point. He's just teaching me that not only the work ethic, but the, how to also take my lumps. If I remember one time making a mistake on a brochure and it was going to cost several $100s to rerun the press plate or whatever it was. And, he made me pay for it because it was my mistake, and that was a big shock. I didn't have $200, but he kind of taught me that this is real, this is business. This is not a student project anymore. You're an entrepreneur. So I graduated with a master's degree, fully expecting to land that dream ad agency job. I mean, I won't say Mad Men because that didn't exist back then, but I'm saying that, I had this vision of being in a corporate office with a view of a cityscape. And, that was what I thought was going to happen. And again, absolutely could not get a job. I couldn't find anything. And some of my friends had gone on to get these ad agency jobs. And I was pretty jealous, frankly. Mm-hmm. And there was another moment where I was doing like side hustle work, to pay my rent and to provide my beer money, and as essentially a college kid. And I remember this is before there were cell phones per se, and I had this cordless phone though in my apartment complex, and one of the big old GI Joe phones with the antenna, and it connected to the base that was up in my apartment, so I could sit out at the pool at my apartment complex in this college town. And if the sun was right and the shade was right, I could get a connection out there. So I remember one time it was a Tuesday morning and there were kids playing the pool. So it must've been summer or a week. It was definitely a weekday. And I remember talking to my friend who had scored one of these ad agency jobs. I mean, like the dream job, one of the biggest agencies in Birmingham, Alabama. And I was super jealous, and I remember speaking to him on the phone and I was kind of complaining. I was feeling like I was not sufficient. I was like, why not me? What's not good about my portfolio? What's not good about my credentials? What am I missing here? And about that time, he heard the kids splashing around in the pool, and he said, Mike, where are you? And I said, I'm sitting out here at the pool, And he said, Mike, how much do you make from your consulting right now? And I said, maybe $1,500 a month, maybe 2,000 in a good month. And so he's like, so you're making 18,000 a year, something like that. And I said, yeah, I guess so. I mean, just, I was designing Girl Scout newsletters. I was doing whatever it took. And he said, Mike, I'm sitting in a cubicle. I'm wearing a tie. I have to drive back and forth an hour to the office every day. I'm making 22,000 a year. So you do the math. And it really was a wake up call that, wait a minute, maybe I don't have to get that job. Maybe it's okay if I don't get that job. Maybe I should just do what I'm doing. And so that's what I did. I took out a small business loan and bought a computer and then just set up shop. I got some business cards printed called Vision Advertising. And I just started leaning into the freelance work rather than wondering why I don't have a corporate job. And that forever changed the path of my life because from that point forward, I became an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And so I'm curious because it's always funny, like how we end up falling into what we do. Right. And I have kids that are old enough to start thinking about what they want to be doing, and college age kids. And I've been kind of realizing that, it's really good just to start somewhere, right? Because life will reveal itself to you along the way. And if you're willing to listen to your heart and to kind of pay attention to the things that are showing up, you can figure it out, so to speak. Right. And I think that's, something that, maybe you do your entire life. I'm still figuring it out. Right. You kind of go from one thing to the next, but I'm curious, and this is why, I love the kind of format of our podcast, is because, oftentimes you can really see how one thing led to the next. So you end up, in this advertising world, and you said Mad Men, which wasn't a thing, but the idea of like something kind of cool, right? Like high energy, you know, maybe looking good, fun, like money, right? Like this is where it's going to be. I'm going to be a success, and and maybe, girls will like me or whatever else, you're still thinking about, like from, your childhood, or just, even at that stage in your life that seems, important, maybe is important, but it's actually fueling you more than you think, and at the same time, you go down a path of creativity too. So it's not just, kind of all the fun, looking good, kind of cool childhood things you took on, but there's some creativity in there too that feels important to you also, which I think is another kind of biggie for us that, and I'm not sure if it's everybody, but I think most people probably are meant to be creative, and we suppress that because we think we're supposed to get desk jobs and do all these other things that society tells us we're supposed to do. So there's that's a little debatable. Some people say I don't have a creative bone in my body. I'm not convinced, but I'm just kind of curious to hear you, as I reflect that back to you, kind of share just how important all those steps along the way were to lead you into what eventually becomes an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I still say this, although everyone around me would immediately call BS. But I'm lazy. Like, and probably always have been. But everybody around me thinks I'm one of the hardest working people that they know, and it's because something did ignite in me when I began creating something. And in my case, it was creating a business. I didn't know really that that's what I was doing, but I got high off that. I had a sense of achievement, and when I got a paycheck and I could provide and pay for my own apartment, and I could live by myself because I was making enough money to have a little 2-bedroom apartment and have an office in it, have my own business cards and have my own computer. I felt like I was, I thought I was Bill Gates, and it really did start to drive me. So even though I'm lazy in a physical labor sense, you put me out doing real hard work, I shut down pretty fast. But mental work, I got really energized over. And so I began leaning into that. And as a result, kind of, as you say, one thing leads to another. This computer that I bought, I took out a business loan, bought a computer, set up shop. Well, this computer I bought came with this little thing that most people much younger than me don't remember, but called an AOL disk. And an AOL disk, AOL was an unknown company. They were third place behind 2 other companies called CompuServe and Prodigy. And there was no Yahoo or Google or Amazon or any of that, eBay, none of that. And the computer came with this disk, and I popped this disk in, and it gave you 10 free hours. Back then, for anyone who's younger in your audience, we paid $3.95 per hour to be on the internet. And the internet wasn't what we think of today, of course, and the web did not exist. But so I put this disk in and was immediately, just because of my gaming background, I was engaged. I mean, I was very much engaged in this thing. It's like, wow, you can chat with people and you can click here and get stocks. And I didn't even know what stocks were, but I could look at stocks and I could do all of these things. And it blew my mind. And after a few months of using it, I kind of blindly, again, as an entrepreneur with time on his hands, I sent a business proposal to America Online. And by sent, I mean, I didn't mean via email. That really wasn't a thing. I mean, I went to Kinko's and I printed out a little 5-page. I heard they were looking for people who were going to change the business model, who were going to be the infopreneurs of this new medium that was launching. I didn't know what the hell they were talking about, but I had an idea and I sent it to them on pieces of paper that were stapled at Kinko's, and I fired and forgot about it. And, a few months later, I get a call out of the blue by a guy named Miguel, and he's in Arlington or Tyson's Corner, Virginia, and said, we really love your idea. I'd love for you to come up and speak with us about it. And again, out of total ignorance, I was like, well, do you guys do you guys pay for the flights? Or, like they kind of laugh, no, we don't pay for the flights. Again, I'm an idiot. I don't know how this stuff works. So I literally called two of my high school buddies. One was in law school at Chapel Hill in North Carolina, and he was on the way. And so we literally did a road trip. We said, yeah, we'll be there. We literally drove 24 hours to get to DC, and we spent the night all together in a Comfort Inn room that we split, and got there at 4 a.m, went to our 8 a.m. morning meeting. We slept for 2 hours all in the same bed, Comfort Inn, and went to the AOL meeting. And that's a whole long story. The first meeting was a disaster, but eventually we got them to invest in our idea. And that became a pretty huge, well, it was arguably the largest inflection point from an entrepreneurial status. But that really starts to bring all of the things together: gaming, humor, friendship, business, etc.
Yeah. So, I saw that in your bio, and I'd love to hear more about kind of that piece, how it kind of all comes together. Because to me, this is really the key thing that, again, kind of, when I talk to my kids, or when I talk to anybody, that's looking for business advice, mentorship, or even, for myself, as I continue to evolve what I'm doing. It's part of the reason I love this podcast, is because you want to do things with people you really enjoy. You're in good conversation, you share values, you've got the same kind of desires in life, and then you want to do things that you actually like to do, that are fun. The idea of play. And so, as I read your bio, I see a lot of that. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about kind of how this AOL experience starts to unfold for you in that kind of way.
Yeah. So the original idea was to create the world's first humor site. And again, there were no websites back then. Okay. So none of this existed. So the idea was, we called it Hecklers Online. And the idea was that the heckler is the person in the audience, right? For the first time in human history, the person on the stage would not be the star, it would be the person in the audience. And that was the entire premise for Hecklers Online, was that the community, the audience, would write the jokes, not a handful of writers for David Letterman who write jokes behind the scene. But instead of writing a top 10 list that might be funny or not, because you only have 2 or 3 writers, instead you've got a universe of writers. So as an example, our interactive top 10 list, we would receive thousands of submissions every day. We did it 365 days a year, holidays, etc. And we would post a different topic every day. So it might be top 10 rejected names for Madonna's baby, or, top 10, reasons you should never fly on Delta, or whatever the heck we came up with. And we would receive thousands and thousands of suggestions every day. And we would curate those suggestions and put them into a list and give the person who submitted it credit, And so these were the founding principles of interactivity. We were the first people, we had the most successful launch in AOL's history up to that point. So we, instantly became almost the Saturday Night Live of AOL. And in fact, most AOL people thought we had hacked our way into the system, because we were so irreverent and unlike. We were kind of like Monty Python. We were not vulgar, but we were smarmy and sarcastic and just kind of troublemakers. And so we were kind of the SNL of AOL in the early days. Some people loved us, some people hated us. But what we did do is we shook it up, because at that time, no one updated content more than once a month online. So every time Time came out with a new magazine, they cut and paste the articles. There were no videos or anything like that. And it would just be new text would be available. And then it would be 30 days before you would see new content from them. Well, we introduced the idea of content by the minute, by the hour. So we had dozens of contests going, dozens of activities happening. Our screens were colorful. It was very Mardi Gras colors, and very just, like this weird place that people are like, what the hell is this? And it was unlike anything anybody had ever seen before. So it exploded overnight. And we were constantly in trouble. Again, kind of going back to the troublemakers, we were constantly AOL's terms of service. It was TOS. They were kind of like the police force of AOL. So they were constantly making us take down articles or take down things or censoring us. But we were always pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable and what wasn't. And most of the other communities didn't have to worry about that. We were the ones who were kind of pushing those boundaries because we were the troublemakers. Mm-hmm. So we had a huge successful launch. And then that was humor. And then one day, I wish I could say it was a business plan and we had all this great strategic thinking and everything, but that wasn't the case. We were at AOL one day and they said, "What's next, man? What are you guys going to do next? You guys just had this amazing launch. We want to know what else you got in mind." And we were talking about video games or something. And somebody said, if you reviewed video games, they'd send you free video games every day. And we're like, what, really? And so we launched a video game site and it became the largest video game site in the world at the time. And sure enough, we started receiving video games in the mail and people like, "Hey, can you review, this Quake game or Mario 64 or whatever it is?" So all day, next thing you know, we're doing humor and irreverent comedy and we're doing video games. And then later on, we did sci-fi and fantasy. So all of these geeky things that we loved in high school and college, whether it was Star Wars and Star Trek or Mario 64 or Monty Python or irreverent humor, now that was our daily job. So every day go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, I love it, right? Because this is now your daily job. And, this is what, I call opus, where you get to kind of just like do things that you would typically just be doing with your buddies, or in your spare time, but you're getting paid to do it. And so It does not feel like work, and this is great because, I like to kind of reflect back on what you were saying earlier, this kind of, irreverent comedy, well, you had a bit of that as a kid in you that was giving you joy and pleasure and energy and was fun and exciting and to some degree how you like to spend your time. You weren't really technically allowed to do it, but you found a way now that allows you to do it and get paid to do it. That's kind of like the goal, when you find that you could do that forever. That you don't need to retire because that's somebody's paying you to do what you love to do.
Absolutely. And we had a very blissful 6 or 7 years doing that. But what happened is we began to lose. Again, I'm in great. I'm surrounded by my best friends in this process as well, which makes it even better. Right. It's like these are guys I grew up with and that I just still play games with on last night until 2 a.m. this morning. I've had about 3 hours of sleep. And, these guys are just lifelong friends and business partners. So it was like just hanging out with your buddies. And we literally had a couch in the office and we just put a projector and started playing Mario Kart on the wall. And that just became a thing. But we grew it to about 70 employees at its peak. I would say most of the years we were in the 20, 25 employee range, but we grew it to where it was just this huge creative team of artists and writers and video game reviewers. But what happened was it's a lot easier as you grow as a business. It's a lot easier economically to hire someone to review video games than it is to hire a senior VP of business development, for example. So what happened is that we ended up graduating into the corporate roles within our own company. And next thing you know, we're not the ones playing the games. We're the ones talking to lawyers, talking to venture capitalists. We're the ones dealing with, business strategy sessions and all this crap. And, everybody else that we hired is out writing comedy and making funny videos, jib jab type stuff and reviewing video games. So, the last couple years, I would say, were extraordinary because we were able to cash out at a great time, but it also wasn't a fun part of the business. We also did to bring in another element, and this goes back to the opposite gender. We also were approached by Playboy at some point. They wanted us to create content for their network. They were trying to grow a network that would target Gen X males, and they wanted video game reviews, and they wanted humor, and they wanted sci-fi and fantasy. They wanted to have much more offerings than what their magazine typically offered. So we started working for them. And so now you really enter, now you've got video games, you got Playboy Mansion parties, you've got humor, you've got comedy, you've got sci-fi and fantasy. It was like, this is this the life I'm living, you know? And so
Yeah.
we're going out to LA for, you know, Playboy functions, or we're going to New York for video game expos, or Japan for, you know, venture capital summit meetings. And so we're like, you know, it really was this golden era, and incredibly exhilarating for a 25-year-old, you know, to kind of be in this position, and to be, you know, I was 29 by the time I kind of stepped down as CEO. But that said, it really was an extraordinary moment in our lives.
Yeah. So tell me, you know, you guys eventually end up cashing out. You know, you have this realization that, and I'm not sure if you did at the time or later in hindsight, but you know, now you're kind of the corporate guy and having to do all the corporate things, even though it's a golden era. You know, you've lost some of the fun of the job to begin with. Tell me, you know, kind of how does that come to an end? And I want to make sure we talk about 30A and everything you're doing now. And I'm also really curious. I can't help but to think, you know, when you talk about kind of the AOL days and there wasn't websites and content creation and all of these people wanting to kind of get into the content world. What's happening now? I mean, I definitely want to make sure we talk about kind of, you know, Web3 and kind of metaverse and everything that's starting to happen. It feels like that all over again for me. So tell me a little bit about kind of how you transition into 30A.
So what I didn't realize I was doing, was we were developing the principles of community building, online niche community building. And that did not exist. And it's very easy. I mean, I'm not trying to take credit, but I also don't think we'll ever get proper credit, you know, because we developed a lot of the principles that are now just commonplace, right? You know, in terms of interactivity, in terms of aggregating content, in terms of curating the best content and elevating it, letting your audience have the microphone. So a lot of these things that we now assume, just it's kind of common sense, we were building those blocks and showing other companies how to do it. We were being emulated and copied, you know, in a positive way by people right and left. So we ended up, Sean and Scott and I, my partners and friends, developed the principles that, you know, we still use and see today. I mean, now it would have inevitably happened, right? You know, we weren't, you know, the only guys who could have come up with it, but it's kind of like Milton Berle wearing a dress on TV. You know, somebody was going to wear a dress, but it took Milton Berle to go, oh, people in the Midwest can see me now, not just hear me on radio. So if I put a dress on, that's funny because they've never seen that before, right? So in our case, we were developing the foundation that now everybody uses. It was inevitable that those foundations were going to be built, but we just happened to be the guys who did it. So we sold the company in a majority interest in December of 1999, about 4 months before what later became known as the dot-com crash. We were not one of these companies that we had no debt. You know, we didn't have a burn rate that exceeded our means, and out of ignorance. I mean, you know, if we didn't have money for a computer, we didn't buy a computer. You know, I mean, it was just what was in the checkbook. While other companies were out there raising tens of millions of dollars, burning through it, and the idea that they would go IPO and they would go supernova, and everybody would make their money. Well, when the music stopped in April of 2000, all of those funds dried up. You know, nobody was putting money into those companies anymore. And so in our case, we were advertising supported in an era when nobody was advertising supported, right? I mean, people didn't advertise online except .com companies who had all this money, because nobody understood what online advertising was or whether it should even be allowed. And what happened with us is that over time, as those .com companies died, they stopped advertising. So our model eventually got hit because we were advertising supported. And as the advertisers died, that drove CPM rates through the floor. So, you know, one year we're making $60 CPM on ads. Next year, we were lucky to get $2, you know, CPM, if we could even get it.
Mhm.
So that's when we kind of shuttered it. We didn't bankrupt. We didn't, we just didn't have any, we just kind of unfortunately had to lay off a bunch of people, including dear friends that we had recruited from other places. So we learned the ugly side of the business, not the ugly side, but the not so fun side. And that was
Right.
where we're having to lay people off. We're having to think about what we want to do next. And I got involved in a lot of businesses that I literally had no passion about. No, I went back into the corporate world, into healthcare IT for a while. I bought a restaurant and miserably failed at that. I did a bunch of stupid, dumb things over the next decade
Mhm.
that were demoralizing,
Mhm.
because, you come off of this high thinking I'm the smartest cat in the room and realize, nope, I'm an idiot, and realizing that entrepreneurship, it doesn't matter sometimes how good your idea is, how good your business plan is, or how good your team is. Sometimes the stars just don't line up. And you
Mhm.
have to look at it a little bit more like baseball. It's like if you're batting 300, you're a
Mhm.
rock star, but that still means you're striking out 70% of the time.
Mhm.
And I think that having the success I had with that first company was aching to kind of get into the major leagues and hitting a home run at your first bat and going, well, hell, that's easy. Let's just keep
Mhm.
doing that, and then
Mhm.
you get up there and strike out the next 8 times, and you start to question yourself, and you start to question, man, maybe that was just luck. In hindsight, it wasn't luck. I mean, it was a lot of hard work, and we navigated a lot of minefields. But where I made the mistake in that next chapter of my life is pursuing things strictly for money, strictly because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm supposed to go work as a chief marketing officer of this healthcare IT company, or I'm supposed to go start another business. I mean, nobody really told me I didn't have to do that stuff, or I didn't have to do it that way. So
Mhm.
at some point, after I'd had enough failures that I couldn't take it anymore, my wife and I, we have 4 children, and we decided to pick up and move to the beach. We knew we wanted to move somewhere. Well, we didn't decide we wanted to move to the beach. We just knew we wanted to move somewhere, and we were looking at international options. We were looking at domestic options, and we just I won't say accidentally, but uh, life, the eddies of the river brought us to this beach where we call home now. And I again, to make the transition complete, or at least to lead into the next chapter, what I then began doing, just because it comes second nature to me, is I began building a community again around a niche interest. My niche interests in the early days were humor and video games and sci-fi. And at this stage in my life, my interest was, the beach and living a happy lifestyle. So I began developing a community around the idea of living a happy life at the beach. And that all of those skills that I developed with hecklers and my video game sites, I applied to the beach lifestyle. And so that's kind of, it happened accidentally. It wasn't intentional, but
Mhm.
it's just second nature to me. And so that really is what I've developed now, is a community of people who are passionate about the beach lifestyle.
Mm. And I know that takes a number of different forms. I mean, there's, you know, 30A from craft beer and wine to electric bikes and real estate and sun care and apparel. So tell me about kind of that, because I'm actually and maybe we'll connect when we're done recording. I also have kind of come to realize that what I love to do is build community. And I think it's kind of funny because community is inside of a lot of things. And if you're not paying attention, you might think that you're, in my case, building real estate or just hosting a podcast. But actually what you're doing is you're building a community. And if you put a little energy into it, there's something really tangible there that is called community. So without going down that rabbit hole, I do want to hear a little bit about how are you building community with 30A? There's a lot there. So to talk about the 30A community.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, I moved to a town called Santa Rosa Beach, Florida, which is in the panhandle of Florida between Destin and Panama City Beach. And it's a rural, I won't say rural, it's small towns, little small boutique beach towns. There is no downtown per se, but they're all these cool little beach resorts and funky beach communities along this particular stretch of road that is called Scenic Highway 30A. Now, 30A is kind of like saying Route 66 or A1A or US 1. So when I moved here, we didn't know anybody, and I didn't know how I was going to provide for my family. I had a nest egg, but we were now spending into that. And so I didn't know what we were going to do. I just knew that I was ready to just kind of do a reset. So we picked up and we moved to the beach, kind of sight unseen in some ways. And just like within 90 days of having made the decision, we found ourselves in this new place. And I gave up my cell phone. I had no emails coming in because I had no business anymore. We had shut down a couple of failed businesses. So I thought, I want to be a writer. I want to be a writer. I want to be creative. I want to get back to writing, whether it's a novel or a screenplay or short stories. I just felt like that's what I wanted to do. So I applied to a couple of the small little local newspapers, and you made nothing in the grand scheme, just peanuts. But I thought I need to start practicing my writing skills, and what better way than to get some newspaper assignments. And then I also figured, well, I better start blogging. And I didn't really know what a blog was per se, but I'm like, that would give me an opportunity to kind of exercise these muscles that I had left since I'd worked writing humor and video game reviews, right? So I wanted to get back in the swing of that. And so I felt like I needed a URL for this blog. Now, nobody called this area 30A back then, right? So I bought 30A.com. It just happened to be a road near us, and I just bought it. And I started blogging about our family's transition to this new beach lifestyle. And that blog just kind of grew. Meanwhile, I started doing consulting, public relations consulting for a couple of companies, and that was paying my bills. But I for fun, as a hobby, was just sharing experiences on this webpage. And then it started to even become sharing recommendations, because one of the things that happens when you move to the beach is all of a sudden you have all these people who come visit you. And I was in love, and still am in love with my town, my home community now. And I wanted to remember, oh yeah, we got to take people to this place, or oh, we got to take them for the sunset view here, or the martinis here are amazing. So I started developing lists of recommendations, and people started following that, almost like, ooh, I didn't know about that place, that's cool. And finally, after doing that for 3 or 4 years, just as for fun, a real estate guy came up to me on the beach one day and he said, hey Mike, I really like your website. I'm like, oh, thanks, man. And he said, how much is it to advertise on it? I hadn't even thought about it as a business, so I just said, I don't know, $50 a month or whatever. And he said, okay. And he wrote me a check, and I put his ad up there. And a few weeks later, another guy like, hey, how much is it to advertise on your site? And I'm like, I don't know, $100. And then I kept, just going up. And over time, it ended up becoming this great side hustle, which was now not only something I loved to do, but was generating, a few $1,000 a month. And in 2000, and I want to touch in a second on the 4-Hour Work Week. I'm sure you're familiar with that, but that book really influenced me dramatically, and really was the foundation upon which I built this business. And at some point in 2011, I lost both of my consulting gigs in back to back. I mean, not through any misdeeds or anything like that. They just kind of expired and had run their course. But at that time, I thought, I may just focus on this 30A thing and just see if I can make a go at it. Because I was probably making $3,000 or $4,000 a month at the time. And I thought, I might be able to focus my energy in, instead of building somebody else's brand like I've been doing over the past few years before that, building somebody else's marketing and public relations. I bet I could focus my energy on this. And that's when the inflection point started to happen, when the business really began to grow. And I've always worked remotely, since moving to the beach, and even before that. So I've always been able to work from anywhere. We took our kids out of school for a year and went around the world. So I was doing my job in, Turkey and Bosnia and Bali and Hong Kong and all of these places. And my kids were doing virtual school and, all of these things. So that was kind of a lifestyle inflection point that made me realize, oh, we really can design this incredible life. We really can do what the book says. And since then, and again, we can talk more about the 30-day
Mhm.
business model per se, but I really have been in pursuit of that. It's like, how do
Mhm.
I, going back to the Ravikant thing, to me, time, yes, health is assumed. If you don't have
Mhm.
health, you're screwed. I mean,
Mhm.
like, you've got to have that. But I even money, I'm just kind of push a little bit further down the list. You got to have enough to survive. But I would
Mhm.
argue that I was pretty happy in my college days making absolutely nothing,
Mhm.
and still was finding myself in college bars 3 or 4 nights a week, having fun with my buddies and playing video games. And somehow, when money came into the equation, I became so money obsessed that I
Mhm.
lost touch with a lot of that happiness. And now I'm convinced more than ever that time is the most essential thing. And as my friend says, it's the ultimate luxury.
Mhm.
Time is the ultimate luxury. And really, at the beach, you begin to embrace that notion that money isn't that important. Really, down here, your success is measured by how many hours you can sit on the beach if you want to,
Mhm.
guilt free, without any other obligations.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. What I want to, as we start to run out of time here, what I want to kind of make sure we touch on, because it feels like it's kind of all coming together a little bit here now in this moment in time, um, where this kind of new next, call it what you want, metaverse, Web3, NFTs, this whole kind of next stage of technology, and how that's going to impact humanity, and the role that community has in that. I feel like there's a lot of dialogue around, in particular with virtual reality, that we're going to become disconnected, and going away from each other, and people feel that way about social media. And so I've got to hear your take, because you've really been in the game, literally, from the very beginning, and kind of seeing the ups and downs, and the booms and the busts, and you've seen kind of how things have evolved, and you've seen where people have said, gaming's bad, or the internet's whatever, and kind of the fads, and the things that were actually fads, and the things that actually stuck. I want to hear kind of your take on the um the next stage that we're entering into, that maybe we're already in, and kind of how you see this going. What role does it have in continuing to build community, into being able to kind of have this peace, or joy, or happiness, or freedom that you find at the beach? Where are we going? Talk to me a little bit. Give me your insight on kind of where we're at and where we're going.
Well, if I say too much, honestly, this is probably where the wheels come off, and then everybody goes, "Oh my God, this guy's crazy," because I do have, my friends and I talk a lot about life, the universe, and everything, if you will,
Mhm.
and I have not. I mean, again, this is where I'm going to sound totally cuckoo biscuits, but it is an entertaining thought.
Well, you're also in the right place, with the right person to be talking about, that kind of stuff. So go for it. Don't hold back.
I'm not entirely convinced that we're not in a simulation. I mean, I will just be upfront. I mean, Elon was actually the first one that put that seed probably in my mind, and it just seems so ridiculous and so outlandish. But I think he made a statement that there's a 1 in a billion chance that we're not in a simulation. Now, this is a
Mhm.
pretty smart dude, right? I mean,
Mhm.
we like him or love him or hate him or take him or leave him. Pretty smart dude. And if there is a guy who's hacked into the game of life, between PayPal and Tesla and SpaceX and Starlink and all that, here's a dude that seems to be bending reality, right? I mean, he seems to have figured out the algorithm of the game of life, whatever that
Mhm.
means. And he's pretty convinced that we are in a simulation. And if that's true, he seems to know how the rules work, and is kind of playing with that. Now, I grew up devout Catholic, and so I'm looking at it a little bit from a biblical and my belief in God, and I'm not a religious person, but I am a spiritual person. And you know, the more I've dug into it, I'm like, that's not inconsistent with what I was taught growing up. Basically we're taught that, this is not your real body. This is not, there is something beyond this. This is not what you see is not real. It is, there is something more, and this is a shell, that contains an essence that ultimately goes on to something else. And, and you start to think that through, and then you start to think through, okay, my friend brought up this interesting point. Think about billions of years of existence that we're, able to pinpoint or be aware of. What are the odds that I literally, out of billions of years, my brief lifespan, I literally have seen video games go from being a dot that bounces back and forth on between two virtual paddles to where you can now put on a headset and virtually get nauseous, feeling like you might be stepping off of a cliff. Mm-hmm. So Elon's premise is that if you only take that 10 more years, it will be indistinguishable from reality, which means in all likelihood, we're already there. Mm-hmm. Now, my friend's point is we have to be the luckiest people in the world in humankind to just literally be at the point where at 6 and 7 years old, we're getting a Pong game, we're going to Atari, we're going to Commodore, we're going to Nintendo, to where now we're going into this area where you're not going to know whether you're in virtual reality or not. By the time you imagine suits that give you stimulus or, whatever, that's not that far off. In fact, it's inevitable. Mm-hmm. So I think there is kind of like that's a little bit of a flag, it's like, are we just happen to be that random group in a billions of years that saw that from day one till present? Or is this all syncing up for a big reveal? Right. And I don't know the answer to it. It's just fun for us. My friends and I like to talk about philosophical stuff like that. But I would say, if you excluding the crazy talk, which way it's going to go, it can obviously be very dystopian. It can be very positive. It can be very negative. I think where it's going to go is just like anything. I think when you develop nuclear technology, the first thing you do is blow shit up, and somebody's going to get hurt, and there's going to be a lot of bad things that happen before we figure out how to control it if we don't blow ourselves up in the process. So I think that it's not going to be unlike unlocking nuclear technology, and then entering a Cold War where that it's a weaponization that could destroy us. But if we get through it, if our wisdom catches up with our scientific knowledge before we end up destroying ourselves, I think it could be a very amazing, wonderful, positive thing. But I think before we get to that moment of ultimate happiness and positivity, I think we have to navigate not destroying ourselves, whether that's through, man-made creations or artificial intelligence taking over, whatever it is. I think there's going to be a lot of pitfalls, just like there was with the advent of nuclear technology.
Yeah. Yep. I hear you. Like I said, you're in the right place, talking to the right person to kind of lay out that theory. And I actually think there's something to it all, that feels, that one of the things that I've kind of really learned recently is that, what we think of, in our mind, of certain things like, virtual reality or, simulation, right? We have it in our mind that it's something different than what it actually is. And kind of, this is maybe me getting a little spiritual or, woo woo, with you. But, when you talk about religion and you talk about how you were raised and spirituality and God, right? Like maybe that's the simulation, right? That it's just like this universal, thing, which I call God, not, an individual, with the beard and, in the chair, but like this energy, right? And it's the simulation, and we are just all part of that, right? And that is kind of what a lot of religion is based on, and kind of, what to me seems way more likely than, it's just like random, like, and it's funny because sometimes I watch my kids play video games, and I see how kind of, they're, and you read a lot about this, or the, social dilemma talks about, how the machines are using us, right? And it's like, well, all right, maybe we are just players in this game that somebody else is playing. So anyway, I love it. I could go down that rabbit hole with you for hours. Maybe we'll catch up, talk more about that, and kind of metaverse and some things I'm starting to do as far as community goes. I'd love to pick your brain, but let me wrap up here. Final thoughts. Anything that you want to make sure you share with the audience, or just anything that's kind of coming to you as we conclude.
Well, again, we're fine. My wife and I are finally empty nesters, and we have decided this year, after 2 years of challenges that everybody has faced, we also we experienced some challenges with regard to the pandemic, personal health issues that my wife had a very adverse reaction, and so she was kind of paralyzed for about 5 or 6 months this past year. She's a yoga teacher, and she's now able to walk and drive again. But it was definitely a wake-up call that time is ticking, and that health component, when it goes away, it changes everything. And now we have her health back for the most part. And so we've decided, come hell or high water, this is the year where we're going to go back out. And so we're preparing to leave within about 30 to 60 days to go around the world again, and to spend the next couple of years traveling aimlessly. And I'm fortunate enough to have built a business on principles that enable me to do my job from anywhere. And so we've decided that, again, this pursuit of what excites us, we're still going to keep our home here. We still love the beach. We love our community. We're still going to be doing what we do. But we've decided that time is ticking, and while we have our health, we better get out there and see what all this world has to offer. So I want to encourage everyone to, just like there have been numerous times in my life where I've hit the reset button, including, not able to get the ad agency job, and I reinvented myself as an entrepreneur, including having business failures and hitting the reset button and picking up and moving to the beach blindly, not knowing what was going to come, to now we are going to hit the reset button and really architect a life of travel and adventure and love and romance and friendship, and focus on the things that really matter the most to me, which is my friends, which is my family, and also our adventures. And so I want to encourage everyone to take this moment to not let the pandemic dictate what your next year is going to be, or the next years ahead. I think it's time for us to all shed that skin and to use this moment to elevate our life, to reevaluate things, to move things around. If you're in the portfolio of life, it's time to look at where your holdings are and say, I'm spending too much time doing this. I want to spend more time doing this. And that's what we've really done. And I want to encourage everyone else to use this opportunity and this excuse to do the same thing.
That's great, Mike, and I'm happy to hear that your wife is up and feeling better. And yeah, it's been hard. I think you're right. We can kind of all decide how we want to, digest this pandemic, and what conclusions we want to form, based on our experiences. But there's no doubt it's been difficult for people physically, and emotionally, and that it's had a real impact. And so I'm sorry to hear that was experience for you, but I'm happy to hear that you've learned a tremendous amount from that experience, and are actually going out into the world to put that learning to use. So look forward to hearing all about that. And maybe we'll have you back on to give us an update on your adventures. But I really appreciate the opportunity to have you on today, and to have you share your journey with the audience. It's a great story, and it's good to be with you.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And I look forward to staying in touch with you guys and following along.
All right, that's a wrap. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.